Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's Morbid makeup video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow, okay, in all of this mess today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the brutal murder of 16-year-old Adrianne Reynolds. And when I say brutal, bro, if you haven't heard of this case, if you haven't heard the details of this case, buckle in, or whatever it is that people say. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And you can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. They're all BRATTERSTEIN, but no pressure. So now that I'm done essentially begging you to join my cult, we can go ahead and get into this video. Now this video is on the case of Adrianne Reynolds, and this case was suggested to me by a subscriber named Sarah. So hi Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. And this is a case that I had heard of before. This is a case that I had on my list to cover eventually, and I was just kind of like, I just kind of wait till the muses take me, and today was the day. This is actually one of the very first cases that I started looking into as my maternity leave was winding down. It's not the first one that I filmed, but it is the first one that I started looking into more thoroughly. And I did know the bones of this case, but once I started looking into it and got into those serious details, my God, this case is so messed up, dude. Every case we look into is pretty messed up. And I don't know if it's recently having a baby or what, but I feel like things are hitting me a little bit harder. Maybe it's just like reading victim impact statements from parents, because the more I looked into Adrianne and her life and what led her to this moment and her family and their reactions to what happened, it just hit my heart like a little bit harder. You know what I mean? It's just been like, ow dude, like this is fucked up. Like all of this is so messed up. And it continues to be messed up, because though this case initially happened in 2005 in Illinois, it has had developments in it as recent as 2022. So literally this year, even though this happened in 2005, there are still things happening in this case. So the wound the worst wound a family could ever have is constantly being reopened for them. So I just feel like it's a story worth telling, and of course Adrianne's worth remembering. And as I tell you this case, as I tell you all the details of this case, I want you to think about it, think about all the details, and answer a question at the end, and that is, do you think the sentencing in this case was just? Do you think that the length of the sentences given to those involved were justified or unconstitutional? Basically, do you think these people should have gotten lighter sentences? I want you to let me know down below after you hear everything I have to say. But with that said, today I'm going to tell you the whole story. And while I do, I'm going to be putting on a full face of makeup, hence the makeup and Morbid makeup. And if that's not really your thing, that's cool. Thanks for hanging out this long. I hope you find a channel that presents this case in a way you prefer. But if you don't like true crime makeup, make sure to still tune in for future videos, because I do just true crime videos as well. It just kind of depends on how I'm feeling that day. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the brutal murder of 16-year-old Adrianne Reynolds. And I want to start this particular story off with a quote from Adrianne's mother upon learning the fate of her 16-year-old daughter. She said, and I quote, "I'm not even able to bury my daughter. They tell me they don't even have all of her. I believe in God, and I believe she's in a better place, but I would rather have her here with me." So, the night of January 20th, 2005 was a normal night, a night like any other in the home that Adrianne Reynolds lived in. She had recently moved in with her adopted father, a man named Tony, in Moline. So that night, Adrianne was going to bed. She said goodnight to her father, Tony. She told him that she loved him. He told her that he loved her. She gave him a kiss, and she headed off to bed like she did on all evenings. And things were completely normal that night. The whole family went to bed, and the following morning, Tony woke up for work early. And when I say early, he left that day at like 4 o'clock in the morning, so early. He left, leaving Adrian alone with his wife, Joan, having no idea that that night that he had said goodnight to Adrian was going to be the last night that he ever saw her. That the words, "I love you too," were going to be the last words he ever heard from his 16-year-old daughter. So now let's back up a little bit and talk about Adrianne Reynolds as a person and what happened in her life that led up to her living in and eventually being murdered in Moline, Illinois. So Adrianne Lee Reynolds was born September 12th, 1988. So literally right around the same time as me, just a couple of months before I was born. It's so wild to think that she would be turning 34 this year if this had not happened to her. But anyways, she was born in Kilgore, Texas to a teenage mother. And I can only imagine how difficult that is, because now that I am a mother, bro, this shit is hard. It's a very difficult thing to do. I cannot imagine doing it as a teenager and without my husband, like partnerless, without another adult to share the load and the responsibility with. I cannot imagine. Hats off to all teenage and single parents. I don't know how you do it, truly. I just hats off, because it sounds impossible to me. Anyways, Carolyn, Adrian's mother, her name was Carolyn. Well, Carolyn said that Adrian, who was lovingly given the nickname Little Bit or Angel, was shy or quiet at first, but after you got to know her, she was really bubbly, happy, she smiled often, and she was a talkative girl who loved the sound of her own voice, talking or singing. She had an amazing voice from a young age. Apparently she killed it singing Amazing Grace, and her biggest dream as a kid was to be on American Idol. During family get-togethers, they would turn on the karaoke machine and they would take turns singing, and that was something they really miss now that Adrian's gone. They really miss hearing her singing voice. Things in Adrian's life really took a big change, took a swift left turn, right turn, went in a new direction when she was about 12 years old. It was at this time that apparently she had suffered from a burst appendix, which put her behind in school, and she was never fully able to recover academically. And she just sort of gave up a bit and started at this time hanging out with a more unsavory group and fell further and further away from her mother. Adrian was a wild child, rebellious, a bit of a troublemaker, always getting into fights, smoking weed, partying, and even had been in rehab by the time she was sent to live with her father. She was getting sent there to hopefully get herself back on track because she had just really been dropping the ball and blowing it at school. And this was her parents' thought process was that this was the only way she was gonna get a little bit of a culture shock, get her shit together, and actually graduate. So 2 months after Adrian's 16th birthday, she was sent to live with her father, Tony, and his wife, Joan, in Illinois. And now, Joan loved Adrian, loved having Adrian live there. She said that even though Adrian did turn their home a little bit upside down, their home in Illinois upside down, they loved having her there. And just for clarity, because it gets a little confusing, the family dynamic. Okay, so Carolyn, Adrian's mother, biological mother, she lived in Texas. Tony, Adrian's adopted father, lived in Illinois. So basically what happened here is that Tony was married to Beverly. Beverly was Adrian's maternal grandmother. Okay. And at one point when Beverly and Tony were still together, they adopted Adrian because Caroline was a teenage mother. And I don't know exactly what was going on there, but they adopted her, and Adrian, lived with them for a while before finally going to live back with her biological mother in Texas later in life. But come 2005, that arrangement just wasn't doing very well. And by this time, Tony and Beverly were no longer together. He's now with Joan. I hope that I explained that. It's not super important, but I know it can get confusing when we talk about Tony as her father, but he's also her grandfather. Anyway, So 2005, Adrian sent to live with her father, Tony. And I think the thought process here was that it would be good for Adrian to have like a refresher, right? A change of pace, a new family dynamic. I think her mother at this point was just desperate to try to get her on track. I believe at this point she was a single mom. She was working at a convenience store. Adrian was getting out of control. It was just more than she could handle, and this was her attempt to try to do something better for her child. Adrian's mother said of her decision to send Adrian to live with her father, quote, "I sent her there thinking she would be safer," end quote. But less than 6 months later, her daughter would be murdered in an unimaginable way. So once in Illinois, Adrian was enrolled in a school called the Black Hawk College Outreach Center, which essentially to me sounds like a continuation school. It appears to be a college as well, obviously, College Outreach Center. But for Adrian's purposes, it seems like she was just going because she was having trouble in conventional school and was trying to get her GED because she wanted to join the Marines. Adrian's issue just seemed to be that she just didn't like school or homework. Relatable. And she just liked having a social life and she liked boys. That was her thing. She was a teenager. It's pretty normal. I mean, I can relate to that because that was the life that I also lived. And I know I actually mentioned this before, though I cannot remember what video I mentioned it in, but this is actually the kind of school that I graduated from as well. When I tell Adrian's story, when I was looking into it, she felt so familiar to me. I mean, we're the same age. We were the same age. So we were doing the same things at the same time, the same sort of social situations, going to the same types of schools. And basically what this type of school is like a school that kids that kind of get into either disciplinary or academic trouble get sent to so that they can hopefully get their GED or their diplomas. For me, I was able to get my diploma, but I know that some people went just to get GEDs. And not that it really matters, but I looked into this school because I was like, why not? Let's look into this. And the reviews are split. Some people are saying it's the best thing that ever happened to them. And some people are saying this school seriously sucks. But I guess that could be, that would probably be the case if you look at the reviews for any school, depending on who the reviewer is. But I just thought that I would mention it because I looked into it. And now that's information that I have in my head about a random school in Illinois that I'm going to have to live with forever. So now you have to live with forever. Anyways, Adrian, trying to get her shit together, trying to get her GED, going to the Black Hawk College Outreach Center. She's also got a job. She's working at a place called Checkers. I have never heard of Checkers prior to looking into this case. I don't think we have them where I live, but if you have them where I live, let me know if I'm right. I believe it's sort of like a Sonic, but without the skates. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyways, now that you have all the background, it was while Adrian was attending the Black Hawk College Outreach Center. That's going to get very annoying to say each time. I don't know how many more times I'm going to have to say it, but take a shot every time I do say it. Don't do that. It's going to be bad for you. Anyway, it was while attending that school that Adrian met two teenagers that would eventually lead to her losing her life. These are going to be the two kids that murder her. And this was a girl named Sarah and a person named Harley. Now, for clarity, Harley, at the time that this happened. So Harley is a transgender woman. At the time that this took place, she had not yet transitioned. I don't know what her mental space was, but she hadn't transitioned. She was still living her life as a biological male. She was going by a different name, but for the purposes of this video, since in the last few years, she has started going by Harley. Harley Quinn actually is the name chosen. I'm going to refer to this person as Harley, but I just wanted to clarify and say that in case you have heard of this case so it doesn't get kind of confusing. And just also for a disclaimer, if there's any terminology, if I say anything wrong, it's not from a place of hate, it's from a place of lack of information. Obviously, I feel like that's clear, but I mean, some people are set out in general just to misunderstand you. That's just like life. So for clarity, from a place of a lack of information, not a place of hate. I got nothing but love for everyone except for people that fucking suck like Sarah and Harley in this case. So now Harley and Sarah were both juggalos. Now I don't know if this is still a thing, to be honest, but boy, it certainly was a thing when I was a teenager, which is the same time that Adrian, Sarah, Harley were all teenagers. And basically what a juggalo is a fan of the musical group ICP. If you like ICP, don't feel judged by me. It's not for me. I knew juggalos. I knew juggalos when I was in high school and in junior high. It's a vibe. It's not the vibe for me, but do you. And Harley and Sarah, they did that. Okay? And I don't even feel like this needs to be said, but I'm going to say it anyway, because there's always somebody who's going to be like, oh, I can't believe she's implying that because they are juggalos, they are murderers, and this led to murder. That's not what I'm saying. But this case is often referred to as like the juggalo murder, and when you look into it, like it's always mentioned that they were juggalos, so I'm just mentioning it. Obviously, that did lead to the murder, and obviously like the music you listen to, in my opinion, doesn't lead to you killing people, because if that was the case, if the music you listen to is a reflection of how violent you're going to be, like lock a bitch up, because the stuff I listen to, if you were to put me on paper, it's not going to look good, you know what I mean? But obviously there are other things that contribute, and this is just one of the bullet points of who they were, especially at this time. They were dressing in those baggy pants, they were listening to that music, and that's just a fact of this case. Okay, now that we've introduced everybody, let's get into a little bit of background on these two people, and let's start with Harley, Ms. Quinn. Harley was known as being a quiet person, a person who really didn't stand out much except for their style. They were a bit of a metalhead, a 2005's metalhead, I guess, and they just liked to listen to music, smoke weed, and hang out with their ex-girlfriend turned best friend. This was Sarah. Sarah, who was living with her mother Kathy and stepdad Darren at the time, was similar to Harley in their interests, but different in that Sarah was a natural leader and Harley a follower. Sarah had a strong presence and demanded attention. Her presence demanded your attention. She was normally seen as pretty laid back, but Sarah was very temperamental and could easily have her temper flared. She was a very confident and aggressive and just a very like boss bitch. That was like the general vibe from people who knew her. An ex-boyfriend of Sarah's said of her, and I quote, "I've seen her get crazy, but I'd never seen her beat anybody up or say she'd kill somebody. She'd say, quote, I want to kick their ass, end quote, but nothing serious." Which, okay, sure. That sounds reasonable. Nothing serious. No real violence, except for at trial, it was read in her journal that Sarah had written some things that would imply that she was a little more violent and a little more dangerous. Things like, quote, "What is it with people today? It seems as if everyone is driving me crazy, and all I want to do is slaughter them like the fucking sheep they are." So, and listen, I know that teenagers sometimes just say some shit. If you were to read my high school journals, you'd be like, maybe this bitch is crazy. But we don't take all of that too seriously because teenagers are angsty. I don't know about all teenagers, but I was angsty. A lot of the people I knew were angsty. But here's the thing. When we look at this case and how it plays out, is being a juggalo alone a contributing factor? No. Is the things that she wrote in her journal alone something to be concerned about? Maybe, maybe not. But seeing as how this case turns out, maybe there was something going on there. Maybe the writing is a bit more sinister when you add it with what happened, and maybe she was a violent person. Maybe. Adrian's family did meet Sarah once, and she didn't make like the best first impression. They weren't super into her. Her father said that like they equated her like black clothing and the piercings in her face, the makeup, the way that she looked as her being a quote thug or freak, and she just sort of had this like goth thing going on, which was like the style, the juggalo style, with like, you know, the big pants and the black and like the two pieces of bangs. You know, if you know, you know, and if you don't, you don't. And I don't know how to explain it. You just have to know. And they said that Sarah was super into this whole goth thing, but Adrian really wasn't until she met Sarah. Tony and Joan were of the position that Adrian just wanted to have friends. She wanted to be friends, not even just with Sarah specifically, but Sarah at this Black Hawk College Outreach Center was a very popular girl. She had a lot of friends. So they believed that Adrian just wanted to have friends, and Sarah was there, and Sarah was friendly, and Sarah was popular, and Adrian just wanted to be friends with everybody, which is partially why she was friends with Sarah, even though they were so different, and Sarah was like a goth. And it's funny, I actually wouldn't consider like ICP fans goths. I guess like sort of. I feel like it's one of those distinctions that unless you're in that like subculture, you don't see the difference. It's like saying that like goths, punks, emos are all like the same. Because unless you're in that subculture, it's really hard to tell the difference, but I guess they could sort of be goth. I don't know. But that is neither here nor there. But anyways, Adrian wanted to be everyone's friends, right? And she, like, for all intents and purposes was. When she went to this school, everybody at the new school really seemed to like her. She was very likable. She got along with everyone. She had this, like, cute little southern accent, and the kids at the school called her Texas for her little southern accent. But of all the people that she had gotten close with since going to the school, and she wasn't even at this school very long. That's something that I don't know if I've mentioned yet, but at the time that she was killed, she'd been there half a year. You know what I mean? But of all the people that she had befriended in her time at the school, her closest was Sarah. And in this school, as I mentioned, Sarah was a popular girl, the leader of her pack. The main person in her pack, though, her number one person, was Harley. The two had met as teenagers. Well, like younger teenagers, because at the time of the story, they're still teenagers. Doesn't sound like it because of the brutality of what they do, but they were still teenagers at the time. But the two, once they met as younger teenagers, bonded quickly and became inseparable. Harley was in love with Sarah, and though they had only dated a few weeks, Harley had vowed to love her forever, saying, and I quote, "I love you. I have since I first laid eyes on you. You were all that I think about. You were the only one I felt I could speak my emotions to, and I want you to know that I'll always be that for you." Big feelings, right? Teenage love. Teenage love is nothing but big feelings. Teresa Gregory, which is Harley's mother, said of this relationship between her child and Sarah, and I quote, and actually before I say the quote, just keep in mind that this quote is going to seem a bit dated because this quote is from before Harley transitioned. Harley, I believe, transitioned in 2022, like started living their life as a woman. So this quote is going to seem dated because at the time that she said it, Harley was still living as a biological male. So, quote, "Corey really wanted to be boyfriend and girlfriend, really bad. And I think Corey, in the back of his mind, thought if he just hung in there long enough as her best friend, she would someday see him as a boyfriend because he was loyal to her and hung in." So the issue here, among many issues, is that Sarah wanted everyone. She was a little bit of a selfish lady, okay? So she didn't want to be in a relationship with Harley, right? Harley was in love with her, didn't want to be in a relationship with her. They had dated, she had ended it, but she wanted Harley to herself. At this time that all of this happened, she also had a boyfriend, right? So she has a boyfriend. She has Harley. And now that Harley has introduced Sarah to their new friend, Adrian, this new girl in school, Sarah looks over at Adrian and is like, I want her too. So Sarah was bisexual and Adrian was sort of still figuring that out. She's 16 years old. She's figuring out how she feels. She definitely was boy crazy. She really liked guys. There was no question about that. But she was curious about where she might fall on the sexuality spectrum as a whole. In comes Sarah. So Sarah seemed to be a bit more serious about this budding relationship than Adrian was. Adrian definitely seemed to be into Sarah. Like, she always wanted to talk to her. She always wanted to hang out with her. But the way that I interpreted this in everything that I read is that Adrian was more interested in being in Sarah's circle, being friends with Sarah, and like the idea of a relationship with her than the actual act of being in one. And so Sarah was definitely more invested in it than Adrian was, at least in the romantic aspect of their relationship. So Adrian would still flirt with other guys, kiss other guys, hang out with other guys. And Sarah would see this. She would get very, very jealous. She was jealous. She was possessive. I think she probably felt like Adrian was like leading her on a little bit. And if that wasn't already bad for somebody like Sarah, who had like a bit of an anger problem and was a bit possessive over her people that she believed were her people, things went from bad to worse when Adrian and guess who started talking? Harley. So Adrian and Harley started having a bit of a flirtation. And when Sarah found out, that was fucking it. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. She was not okay with this at all. I guess the two had already been having problems, you know, with Sarah seeing Adrian flirting with these guys. So they were already having some drama according to people who went to school with them. But after this, that was it. Sarah started calling Adrian a slut and a whore and completely exiled her from her group of friends. Adrian at this point got like really upset and would constantly reach out to Sarah to write her notes, try to call her, and whenever Sarah would answer the phone, she would just yell at her or hang up on her. At school, Adrian would try to talk to Sarah, try to reason with her, try to mend the friendship, but Sarah would just yell at her, make her cry, and tell her to kill herself. Adrian even started, you know, writing her the little notes, passing her notes between class. You remember being a teenager. And she would say things to Sarah in these notes like, quote, "I wanted a chance for us to start over again and to at least be friends." And in another note she wrote, "Why do you hate me so much? And why do you want me to die?" Which, in hindsight, hearing that is incredibly eerie to me. So on Friday, January 21st, 2005, Adrian was scheduled to work a shift at her job at Checkers. And when Adrian didn't arrive home that evening to change into her uniform for her shift for that day, her father, Tony, knew that something was wrong. Because though Adrian did a lot of things, like, you know, she got herself into some trouble, she was a bit of a rebellious person, she was not one to miss work. Like, she was a good employee. She, like, showed up. You know what I'm saying? So when she didn't show up to change into her uniform, her family knew something was wrong. Because they had already confirmed that she had a shift that day. Like, that morning, remember, Tony left at 4 a.m. Joan stayed home, probably because she was just already going to be home, but she would get Adrian up and ready and off for school. And she had confirmed with Adrian that morning that she did, in fact, have a shift that evening. It just was not like Adrian to just bail, because that was where she drew her line. She actually enjoyed working, so she would always go. And, you know, she was trying to get her life together on top of this. So when she didn't show home, her father decided to actually get in his truck and drive over to Checkers to see if she was there. He just needed to see for himself that she had actually arrived instead of just like calling over. So he drove over, and when he got there, he found that no, Adrian had never showed up for her shift that day. And initially, Tony actually got sort of pissed at Adrian, because even though he knew it wasn't like her to bail, of course he's not going to automatically think the worst and think something horrible had happened. So he thought that maybe she had just been out fucking around with some of her friends and had just not gone to work. Because really, what would the alternative be in his brain? That, like, she had gotten hurt, well, nobody had called him, she was underage. If she had ended up in a hospital, I imagine somebody would have called. That she had run away, but like that didn't really seem likely, considering she had never run away before, and she had willingly moved to her father's house, you know what I mean? If she was going to run away, I guess maybe to run back home to her mom, but like she wasn't happy there in the first place. So in his brain, she was just maybe fucking around and had not gone to work that day. But as the hours passed and Adrian still wasn't heard from, Tony started to get a little more worried, and he started calling all of her friends to see if anybody had heard from her, if anybody had talked to her. But each call that he made, he got the same answer. No one had seen her. No one had talked to her. No one had heard from her at all since lunch at school that day. So panicked at this point, Tony he reports his 16-year-old daughter as missing. Tony said of this realization that Adrian had missed work that day, and I quote, "She wasn't an angel or anything, but she had never not come home from school. Never." Initially, the first theory of what had happened here was, of course, that Adrian had voluntarily run away. But this theory was quickly squashed because there was no evidence to support this. Though she was having, you know, these issues at school, nothing had really happened that would lead to her running away. She also didn't take any of her stuff with her. It was even payday, right? It's Friday, it's payday. And she didn't even stop to pick up her paycheck. So it didn't seem likely that she had just ran off. Adrian's family searched for her extensively on their own. They went around and posted missing persons flyers everywhere, and her dad would just like drive around looking for her. It's so sad. He said that he drove, he drove a truck, which I already said, and he said he would drive around, and there wasn't a single car that he passed that he didn't look in trying to find his daughter. Adrian's family was so frantic to find her dude that they even consulted a psychic to try to get information on where she might be. And of course, this psychic told them that Adrian was alive and that she was being held in a basement somewhere, which wasn't true and is very upsetting that they were told that. But while this is happening, while they're searching frantically for Adrian, while they're consulting psychics and putting up flyers and talking to the police and going out and searching themselves, Sarah and Harley are convincing their parents to get them attorneys to talk to police. So as the days passed with no sign of Adrian and seemingly no real progress on her case, the small police force in Moline accepted help from the state police, and it was shortly after this that they received their first helpful tip. This was a tip that someone had actually seen Adrian in a Taco Bell parking lot around midday the day she was last seen, so the day she had gone missing. It was discovered that Adrian had been seen in this parking lot with two of her friends, a 16-year-old Sarah and a 17-year-old Harley. And when her parents heard this, they were a bit worried because Adrian had recently confided in her stepmother, Joan, that she, Adrian, liked Harley, and that Sarah was super, super pissed about it, and that Adrian was worried about how Sarah may react to her because Sarah was such a controlling and possessive person. Obviously, after getting this tip, police bring in Sarah and Harley and question them. And they get pretty similar stories, not exactly the same, but pretty similar stories. And the general consensus is that Sarah and Harley picked up Adrian and they all got lunch before Sarah and Harley dropped Adrian off at a McDonald's near her home. And they said that they dropped her off there instead of taking her home per Adrian's suggestion because her father would not want to see her in the car with a boy. Again, this is pre-transition for Harley. So they said that they dropped her off there so she wouldn't get into trouble. Sure, sounds reasonable. Police went on to ask Sarah if her and Adrian were friends, and Sarah straight up was like, no, I don't even like her. Police were like, that's kind of odd considering you gave her a ride. And she's like, well, yeah, I did give her a ride, and we went and we got lunch, and we actually did get in a fight. She admitted that they got in a fight, that they called each other some names, that they yelled, that they even hit each other a couple of times, but that after that, the two had resolved their issues. They had buried the hatchet, everything was cool, and they dropped Adrian off. No big deal. You don't need to look over here. It's just crazy. It seems like Sarah was the type of person that lied well in that she told just as much truth as she could without telling the full truth, because that's like the better way to lie. That's like the successful way to lie, is like tell as much truth as possible. She even admitted that like during this time, Adrian was like crying and was scared that Sarah was gonna like beat her ass, and that Sarah told her like, you know what, you're not even worth it. It's not worth getting in trouble to hurt you. She was just like super ballsy, dude. She said all of this very matter of fact. And she even ended the conversation with police with asking them if they heard anything about Adrian to please give her a call and let her know. Now, Harley initially had a little bit of a different story. Harley denied everything. Harley denied that the girls even had a disagreement. There was nothing that happened there. They were all super good friends. They went, they had their food, they dropped her off. Nothing happened, nothing to see here. Everything was hunky-dory, OBKB, okay? That's what Harley was saying. But it was Harley who eventually cracked. Apparently, this situation, living with what had happened, became more than Harley could bear. I hope that they were seeing Adrian in their dreams, truly. I hope that they were being haunted, considering what happened here. But it was Harley who ended up cracking and going to police and saying that not only were they and Sarah responsible for Adrian's disappearance, Adrian wasn't just missing, she was dead. The day before making this admission to police, Harley had a little bit of a mental breakdown to their parents. Harley's father said the night before Harley ended up going and admitting what had happened to police, they had been at home and Harley was crying. And so the father, Bert, his name was Bert, started asking Harley questions about Adrian. And as the questions were asked, Harley got more and more hysterical, and it was at this point that Bert knew that something was really wrong. Bert asked Harley things like, did something happen to her in that car? Did she get hurt in the car? Did she get hurt bad? Is she dead? And each time the question was asked, Harley would just start crying harder and shake their head like yes. It was at this point that Bert called Teresa, Harley's mother, and told her she needed to get over right away because some shit was going down, and he believed that Teresa had the right to know firsthand, in person, like what was going on before everything just came out, because it was going to come out. And dude, let's stop real quick right there, because can you even imagine being the parents of this person, dude? Like, how do you deal with that? How do you come to terms with this information? Because, like, this is the same baby that you raised, right? This is the little baby that you held in your arms and you loved so unconditionally, and you sacrificed for, and you stayed up all night for, just holding them and loving them and looking into their little face because you wanted to. And you look at them and you picture all of the wonderful things they're going to become, all the things they're going to be interested in, the type of person they're going to be, hoping that they're going to just be this good person, and just thinking about all the endless possibilities of this little person that you are so in love with has. And then you find out that this is what they've done, that all of that has led to this moment. I do not see how you reconcile those feelings, and like how you would feel and wondering what you did wrong, even though you may not have done anything wrong. It's so hard to even think about, like, this little baby that you love so much turning into that. Like, man, I don't know how anybody deals with that. I just can't imagine how hard something like that must be, and that decision to turn your child in. It just seems so, like, it's what you have to do, but it seems like it would be so hard. And Bert was actually asked, like, if it was difficult for him to turn in his child to police, and he said of this, and I quote, "Oh, I don't know if it was difficult. It was the right thing. Needed to be done. A family needed to know where their daughter was. Things needed to be straightened out. I mean, you can't hide something like this. It's the right thing to do. He needs to face up to what he did, what his part was." And Harley's mother, Teresa, said that they believed that admitting what had happened had brought Harley some peace, that prior to this they had been a broken child, that the stress and the anxiety of what they had done, the guilt, and also all the steps that they had to take after to try to cover up the tracks had just become too much. So getting all of that off their chest was a relief to Harley, which, cool. I'm glad you have some peace now, Harley, but where's like Adrian's peace? Where's Adrian's family's peace? I mean, it's cool that there was a confession, obviously, but like, fuck your peace, I guess is what I'm saying. I just don't have like a lot of compassion and tolerance for murderers. People who kill other people who kill children. 16, that is a child. It's hard for me to give a shit. That just might be me. Might be my opinion, but that's kind of where I fall. I don't know. 4 days after she was reported missing, Harley led police to Adrian's dismembered arms and head. Earrings still in her ears, inside a garbage bag, inside a dirt-covered manhole. The next day, Harley took police to a farm, Sarah's family's farm, where police were then led to Adrian's charred torso and legs in the woods on the farm. So apparently what led to this crime was a very jealous and unstable girl. So, Sarah. Sarah, at this time, has a boyfriend, right? She's dating somebody else. She also had already dated Harley, decided she didn't want to date Harley anymore, wasn't interested in maintaining that relationship. The two were just friends, okay? But Sarah was selfish. She wanted everybody to herself. So even though her and Harley were not together, didn't want to be with Harley, had ended the relationship with Harley, when Harley and Adrian started talking, having a bit of a flirtation, maybe a bit of a crush on each other, This, totally unacceptable. Sarah could not handle Adrian stealing her person. Even though you, Sarah, did not want Harley, like, ma'am? Hello? Hello? And it wasn't even like what was happening with Harley and Adrian was serious. Harley told police that Adrian and Harley had just kissed a couple of times. Like, it wasn't even anything. They were maybe going to go on a date. It was pretty casual. But Sarah, not a casual person, I guess. I don't know. Because when Harley called Sarah to let Sarah know what had happened, what was going on between the two of them, Sarah was pissed and hung the phone up on them. Was like, I'm not even going to engage in this conversation. I guess Sarah was forgiving, at least of Harley, because apparently I've never been on television before. No, apparently Harley and Sarah made up pretty quickly by the next day. They were cool as cucumbers. Everything was tight. And all of her anger was directed at Adrian. And Sarah even wrote about Adrian in her journal the day Adrian went missing. And I quote, "Stupid bitch needs to back up off my Kool-Aid. She's gonna give him a note. Yeah, I'll fucking kill her. Back up off my Kool-Aid." If that's not the most 2005 statement that I've ever heard, then I don't know what is. So, in her rage, Sarah invited Adrian to join her, Harley, and Sarah's then boyfriend Sean on January 21st, 2005 to join them for lunch at Taco Bell. I'm now going to get into the specifics of what happened, just for a heads up, since it's pretty fucked up. There you go. So, the group drives over to Taco Bell, and at some point during the drive over, an altercation begins. And once they get into the parking lot of the Taco Bell, it's like a full-blown fight with the girls yelling at each other and starting to get physical. During this time, Sarah grabs Adrian by the back of the hair, starts screaming at her, and then pulls her in close and starts whispering in her ear, which is truly one of the most unsettling parts of this to me. I don't know what it is about that fact that's so creepy to me, but it gives me goosebumps. It was at this point that Sarah's boyfriend Sean was like, yo, you need to stop. Like, what the fuck's going on? Quit this shit, bitch. And it was at this point that Sarah was like, well, if you don't like it, get the fuck out of my car, kick bricks, get to steppin', walk. And Sean was like, okay, cool, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. And he got out of the car and he left, walking back towards school, seemingly unaware of what was gonna happen next. The girls then got physical and started to hit each other. According to the story, Adrian hit Sarah in the face, giving her a bloody nose. And while all of this is happening, Harley, who the two are fighting over, is just sitting in the back seat, smoking some cigarettes, letting girls hash out their business, not doing anything about it, just letting them do their thing. Eventually, though, the fight ended up moving into the back seat, and this is where things got more intense. And now what happened here depends on whose story you believe. Harley says that Sarah choked Adrian to death. Sarah says Harley choked Adrian to death. Okay? The prosecution's theory is that Harley held Adrian's arms while Sarah choked Adrian to death after beating her in the head with a wooden handle that she kept in her car for protection. Either way, Adrian was strangled to death in that car that day. And Harley says that they didn't think that they had killed her, that initially they thought that she had just passed out, so they just sat there smoking cigarettes, but eventually, when Adrian didn't wake up, they realized they had gone too far. Now keep in mind, this all happened in broad daylight, during a lunch rush, at a Taco Bell. How brazen. And I guess it was like a cold day, so the windows had fogged up, so people couldn't like see inside, but that's still so crazy to me. And I guess like one person did come forward later as a witness saying that they saw the car and thought something was happening in the car, but they couldn't see inside to see exactly what. Harley said the way they ended up knowing that Adrian was dead is that her face and her lips had turned blue. And even though they said that they weren't the ones who actually killed Adrian, the reason that they didn't go to police or do anything is because they were so in love with Sarah. And the idea of Sarah being in jail for the rest of their life was too much for Harley to bear. So instead of getting help, instead of calling police, Harley helped Sarah move Adrian's body to the trunk. So from there, Sarah and Harley drove to Sarah's family's farm, a farm that Sarah's family owned, to proceed with disposing of Adrian's body. First, they attempted to bury her, but they found that because it was Illinois and it was January, the ground was too frozen, just like in the Skylar and Ace case. That's what happened to them as well. If you haven't seen that, I covered that case on my channel as well. You can find it. From there, they decided to go on to Plan B. And Plan B was to burn Adrian's body. So Harley took gasoline, covered Adrian with gasoline, and then lit a lighter and threw it on her. Harley and Sarah then stood there, cuddled up, watching Adrian's body burn for hours. Harley told police they did this because they believed this was the right thing to do, to cremate her, since they couldn't give her a proper burial, to which the police were like, cool story, bro, but I'm pretty sure you were just trying to conceal what you did, and you said yourself you were trying to turn the body into ashes. I think that was more to hide the fact that you committed a murder than you doing the right thing, but sure. So when Plan B failed, they moved on to Plan C, and this is when Sarah asked Harley to cut up Adrian's body to make it easier to dispose of. And this is when Harley was like, no, I'm not gonna do that. That was the line for Harley. Murder? Sure. Burial? No problem. Setting Adrian on fire? Of course. But dismemberment? Not dog. That, I would do anything for love. But I won't do that. R.I.P. Meatloaf. But anyway, this is when they reached out to another kid that they knew. This was a 16-year-old kid named Nathan. Now, they called Nathan, they contacted Nathan, they let Nathan know of the predicament, the problem that they were facing. And I'd love to know what that conversation was like, because I can't imagine just calling up one of my friends and being like, yeah, I killed somebody, I need you to cut up the body, like what the fuck? But apparently Nathan was a weird kid who was into all things blood and gore and horror and enjoyed killing animals and stuff. So they thought he would be the perfect person for this particular task. So they contact him, they make a plan, and the next day Harley and Sarah go pick up Nathan, and the three of them drive out to Sarah's family's farm, Nathan bringing his grandfather's handsaw to dismember the body with. So they get to the farm, and Nathan takes Adrian's body apart, and as he does so, Harley stands there with a trash bag ready to collect the head and the hands, which Sarah had decided should be disposed of in a separate location because these were identifying body parts with fingerprints and teeth, so that police would be able to figure out who this person was. They put those parts in a manhole, covered it in dirt, and they left the remaining parts of Adrian's body in a ravine on the farm. The group then headed to McDonald's because they had worked up a hunger. How? Well, during the whole dismemberment process, they smoked a bunch of weed, talked about music, and got the munchies. So naturally, they then had to go to McDonald's, and Harley, in case you were curious, got a double cheeseburger. What words am I saying right now? And this is something that somebody actually did. I'm saying it. I'm like, what the fuck? Somebody did this to another human being, to somebody's child, to a defenseless girl. What the fuck? Oh, and I just want to mention something because I can't get this out of my head. I can't get the visual of this out of my head. So I feel like I have to tell you about it. And what that is once the three got to the place that they were going to dispose of Adrian's arms, her hands, her head, Nathan gets out of the car, right? He tucks the shovel under his trench coat because, of course, he's wearing a trench coat. In the other hand, he's carrying the trash bag that contains Adrian's head and hands, okay? He then takes off running into the woods. And I just pictured in my head as him running off like the Hamburglar dude. And I don't know if that's just because of the McDonald's thing. It probably is, but that's the visual I have, and I just need you to have that, because it seems like the way they described it is that he was doing it like comically, like a joke. And this kid did not, in my opinion, get enough time for his involvement and his temperament, and there was no convincing needed to convince this kid to cut up a dead body and then to run off into the woods like it's a joke. And I can't get that out of my head, and I need you to have it too. So when you hear the sentence he got, you can maybe be enraged as well, because I was like, I'm sorry, fucking what? Okay. Anyways. So Harley's the one telling police this, right? And police tell Harley, like, yo, you seem super unemotional when talking about something so absolutely horrific. And Harley said of this, and I quote, "I am really emotional, but I like to keep my emotions to myself, you know?" Harley then went on to say that the three of them had done something terrible, something worse than anything you would ever see in any horror movie. Harley's defense attorney then said that Harley, quote, "feels bad that he didn't exercise better judgment, and that he had no idea that this was going to culminate in murder." So, when Adrian's father learned of what had happened to Adrian after she was killed, of how her body was disrespected, he said, and I quote, "I never cried so much in my life. I mean, the murder was bad enough, but what they did after is the hard part. That takes a sick person to take a saw and cut somebody up. I couldn't do it to a dog, much less a human, and I don't know anybody that could, especially at 16 years old." He said that he runs 3 miles a day, every day, and that with every step he takes, he thinks about what they did to Adrian. With Harley's confession, all three were arrested in connection with Adrian's murder and dismemberment. Sarah and Harley were both charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and concealment, and initially, the two both pled not guilty. Nathan, the 16-year-old that helped dismember Adrian, was charged with concealment and ended up taking a plea deal in which he agreed to testify against both Sarah and Harley. And for a fun fact, well, I mean, it's not really a fun fact, it's just like some fucked up information. Apparently it wasn't just Harley's confession that got Nathan arrested. Like, Harley's not the only person who turned him into police. Apparently his own grandma contacted police and turned him in after she found a blood-stained saw, the hand saw that belonged to Nathan's grandfather. She found that in her basement. To live long enough to be a grandparent of a 16-year-old and then have to deal with that bullshit, like, they are too old for this shit. You know what I mean? Like, fuck. So during Sarah's murder trial, which happened first, and by the way, oh my god, apparently during Sarah's murder trial, this little bitch had the audacity to like have a smirk on her face during the proceedings, which makes me so mad. But that's what Adrian's family said happened. But during her trial, which happened first, there was a bunch of testimony heard, right? Teenagers from the school, friends of Adrian's, friends of Sarah's, testified. So though some of them were like afraid to testify, but they testified that Sarah had been so aggressive to Adrian prior to the murder, and that they knew that Sarah had made threats against her and had just been, you know, they talked about her behavior prior to the murder that would illustrate that this may have been premeditated. And they also testified to the fact that Harley was obsessed with Sarah and would do anything that Sarah told them to. Other witnesses gave testimony that would indicate motive, like why this happened. And the first thing was that Adrian and Harley had their little flirtation, their little fling, that the two of them had gone on a date, and that just was not chill to Sarah. Another motive that was given is that, you know, Adrian had been intimate with men during the time that Sarah wanted to pursue her. I guess there was like these house parties that they used to go to that Sarah and Adrian would go to together. And during this time at these parties, Adrian had been intimate with at least 2 dudes, and that Sarah found out about it and was not okay with it. This pissed her off and made her a lot more angry than people thought she should have been. And one of the guys that apparently Adrian had been intimate with, said that Sarah wanted to get with Adrian but didn't want to get with a slut. Her words, his words, never my words, because that's fucked up. One girl testified, like a coworker of Sarah's, like Sarah worked at a movie theater, and this girl worked with Sarah, and they'd been working together after Adrian went missing. And Sarah told this girl, according to this girl, that she had gotten in a fight with a girl in her car that Friday, and that during the fight the girl had coughed up blood, and that when they were done fighting, Harley had helped Sarah, quote, finish the job. Another girl testified that prior to Adrian being killed, Sarah had asked her if she could kill somebody by beating them in the head, which, like, duh, you dumbass. And then she said that Sarah said that she planned to take a girl out to her family's farm and to beat her to death with a stick. She said that Sarah seemed very emotionless while giving this information. Sarah had mentioned to a few people that she was going to kill Adrian. She said, I don't care. She told people she wasn't afraid to kill her, and she would do it, and she's not scared. That's a quote from one of those girls. Nathan, the kid who helped dismember Adrian, testified against them and said that when Harley and Sarah called Nathan to have help with the dismemberment of the body, they told him that Sarah had fought with this girl and had beat her over and over in the head with a stick, and that then Harley held the girl down while Sarah strangled the girl, and that when Adrian, this is how they said it, when Adrian was strangled, blood came out of her mouth. And last, Sarah's boyfriend at the time, Sean, testified against her, and he testified that he had been in the car when the group drove to Taco Bell, and that once they had gotten there, Sarah had asked Adrian for a hug, and when Adrian went in for the hug, that's when Sarah grabbed her by the hair and started screaming in her face and fighting with her. And that's when Sean says that he told Sarah to stop, and that Sarah said that if he didn't like it, he could get out, like walk his ass back to school. So he did just that he, quote, didn't want any part of any of that. Well, not quote, that was very loose, a loose quote. He didn't want any part of any of that. He didn't think it was going to result in a murder, obviously, but he didn't want to sit there and watch two girls fight. So he got out. But he said prior to getting out of the car that Sarah, who was holding Adrian by the hair, like turned her towards Sean and Harley and told Adrian that she needed to stay the hell away from Sarah's people. So things are not looking great for Sarah, right? Like, that's a pretty damning testimony against her. But that didn't stop her from trying to get out of it. She tried to, of course, blame the whole thing on Harley. It was all Harley. She says that the group went and picked up Adrian, and that her and Adrian made up that they were cool, that everything was fine, that they were even talking about boys and talking about sex, and everything was chill. And then Harley, out of nowhere, flew into a rage and attacked Adrian and ripped Adrian into the back seat and started beating her and choking her. And that Sarah, the hero that she was, even tried to intervene, tried to help Adrian. And as a result, Harley hit Sarah in the face, giving her the bloody nose, breaking her nose. And she said that she also didn't take part in burning the body, that she was just there because she was scared, okay? Because Harley had threatened to kill her, her family, even her cat, if she told anyone what had happened. She then turned and looked at the jury in dramatic fashion and said, quote, I was scared of him. I had just seen him kill somebody. Sarah's story, though, wasn't super credible because, first off, she's saying that, like, Harley had just murdered Adrian. She was terrified, but she chose to spend the night with Harley after the fact, so obviously she wasn't that scared. And in addition to that, she had written in her journal the day that she killed Adrian that she was going to kill Adrian, and the day that she killed Adrian, she had also told a bunch of people that she was going to kill Adrian. So, I mean, it was a good try, but it was bullshit, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the jury as well. Well, we're gonna get there. After 2 weeks of trial and 15 hours of deliberation, the jury, which consisted of 4 men and 8 women, was unable to reach a verdict on any of the charges for Sarah. Not the murder, not the concealment. The hung jury resulted in a mistrial. One juror was a holdout. One juror wanted to acquit Sarah, while 11 wanted to find her guilty. 11 of them were all for convicting her, throwing her in jail, getting rid of the key, whatever that saying is, while one of them was like, I don't know, maybe she didn't do it. So this resulted in a mistrial, so she was going to have her case tried again, and the new trial happened in 2006. So at the end of her second trial, despite the fact that her attorney asked for a sentence of only 20 years, she was sentenced to 53 years in prison, 48 for the murder, and 5 for the concealment, to be served consecutively. And when the verdict, the sentencing was what the fuck am I trying to say? That's the question. When Sarah heard her fate, she had no reaction. Sarah's attorney said of her sentence, and I quote, "Clearly the sentence is based on seeing her as a lifelong murderer who will do it again. I don't see it that way." The prosecution said of the murder, and I quote, "To kill somebody because you don't like them. To kill somebody because you had an argument with them. It's senseless. Absolutely senseless." Sarah ended up reading a letter she wrote to the courtroom, and without admitting responsibility for Adrian's death, she says that she wishes she could have done more to prevent it. But she also showed just how heartless and unfeeling she was when she also said, and I quote, "I felt no feeling as she died. There's no excuse why I couldn't turn off my not feeling to feel." That's not even good English, is it? Maybe it is. Maybe I'm the one who doesn't know how to speak English, but to me that doesn't sound right. She also said that she couldn't stop thinking of a song lyric that said, quote, "I would change the past if I had one wish." And I believe that's from the musical group Crazy Town. From what I Googled, they're like a rock rap group. Not really my vibe, not super interested in listening to that. That doesn't sound like something I'd be into. If that's your thing, that's cool. Let me know. I guess. I don't know. I don't even know what I'm saying. Anyways, shortly after Sarah's trial, Sarah's sentencing, all that jazz, Harley decided to change their plea. So initially Harley pled not guilty, but decided to change the plea to guilty, and ended up for that, they were given 45 years, 40 years for the murder and 5 years for the concealment. Adrian's mother said of her daughter's murderers, and I quote, "These kids have no heart. All Adrian wanted was for everybody to like her." So, for the more recent updates. So you remember, okay, backtrack. Harley tried to get a lighter sentence, okay? So you remember, we've talked about this in other cases, how there was a new law written where it was deemed that minors who were given mandatory life sentences, it was considered to be unconstitutional, and that the sentencing was going to be applied retroactively. Well, Harley tried to use this to their benefit to get a lighter sentence, and a new sentencing hearing was actually set for Harley in March of 2022. So this just happened. Harley told the court that they thought their sentence was excessive, and that if they served the whole thing by the time they got out of jail, they'd be useless for society and would not be able to find work. And Harley's defense attorney said of the time, and I quote, "Juniors tend to compound their bad decisions with further bad decisions because they don't know how to process what they're doing, don't know how to seek help." He also argued that Harley's sentence should be cut to 20 years because Harley did not have a developed brain at the time that the crime was committed. Joan? Shit, I've been calling her Joan the whole video, and it's spelled in a way where it can be Joan or Joanne. Tony's wife, Adrian's stepmother, said of this, and I quote, "The law says that juveniles can't get more than 40 years. Harley Quinn was no 12 or 14-year-old. Harley Quinn was less than a year of being of age, because she was 17 at the time." Harley said during this new sentencing hearing, and I quote, "I was a child, and all I'm asking the court to do is recognize the child that I was." Harley then addressed Adrian's family directly, saying, and I quote, "If I could give my life, I would. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't make any difference. I know you'll never forgive me, and I never asked because I don't deserve it. Which, true, you don't. And something that a statement that I quite liked, a little fact that I quite liked, is I guess Harley also said something to the fact that they want to do whatever they can in this life so that when they move on to the next life, they can like look Adrian in the eye, right? Like they can be a good enough person to look Adrian in the eye for what they did. And Adrian's father, Tony, said something to the effect of, well, I'm pretty sure you're going to hell, so you're not going to see her anyway. And I was like, burned. So anyway, the judge who heard this new sentencing hearing, his name was Peter Church. He said that the court was, quote, duty bound to uphold the original sentence. So Harley Quinn ended up getting the exact same sentence that they had gotten at their first trial. Oh, also, I don't know if this is still going on, but Harley was trying to write a book and was asking for donations in order to get it published, saying that this was, quote, their only passion left in life. But Adrian's mother was actively trying to get people not to donate to the book publishing, not to donate for that to happen, because essentially, like, this person doesn't deserve to have any good things in life. I don't know if that was her position, but that's what I imagine her reasoning was, because, like, why should you get to have passion and wonderful things in your life when you literally murdered a 16-year-old child? I thought, like, some people were like, oh, your position might change when you're a parent, da 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 da. Now that I'm a parent, I feel like I'm even more like, you kill my kid, you can fuck yourself. You know what I mean? Like, that's my most important person. Like, my pride and joy, the tiniest love of my life. And if somebody ever did anything to him, I'm not going to be like that big person who's like, I forgive you. Like, no, you can fuck yourself and die. I don't know. So Sarah also tried to request a new sentencing hearing, and this request was dismissed in 2020 with the judge who dismissed it, saying that Sarah was, quote, a cold and callous person that cannot be rehabilitated. She has now petitioned the state of Illinois for clemency, and that hearing was meant to take place in April of 2022, but thus far I do not see an update on her hearing. So if there is an update, by the time I upload this, I'll put like a pinned comment. I believe this video is going up at the end of June, beginning of July. I'm filming it in May. At the day that I'm filming this is actually the day that I uploaded my update video for you guys saying that I wasn't going to do Morbid makeup as much, but yet here I am doing Morbid makeup. So, I mean, I don't know if that's how it's always going to be, but that's how it is right now. So, I guess I'm just a big old liar. I don't know. Now, Nathan, you remember how I told you Nathan's sentencing was going to piss you off? Well, good old Nathan served a whopping 4 years for concealment, which concealment was cutting up Adrian's dead body and helping hide it. 4 years, and was released from a juvenile detention center in 2008. Now, 4 years later, in 2012, he actually died. He was 23 years old at the time, and him and I believe it was 2 or 3 other 23-year-olds, I think they were all 23, it was like a group of young dudes, died after they smashed the car they were in into a tree on a rural road in Indiana. Adrian's family was questioned after Nathan died, like to see how they felt, knowing that one of the people who were involved in their child's murder and dismemberment had died, and they said they felt no joy in learning that he had died. Adrian's father, Tony, said that he didn't feel good about it, but that he didn't necessarily feel bad about it either, which I think is pretty honest and relatable. Tony's position was essentially just that he felt bad for Nathan's family. Not really Nathan, but Nathan's family. And he said of this and of Nathan's death, and I quote, "Some might say what comes around goes around, but that's ugly, and I don't want to hurt his family. They're hurting enough." Apparently, when he was talking about what goes around comes around, specifically what he was talking about, based on the context in the article I read, was the fact that Adrian was murdered and then her body burned when she had just moved to an area just trying to get her life back together and trying to get things back on track. And the exact same thing had happened to Nathan. He had gotten out of jail. He was in a new area. He was trying to get his life back in order and on track, and he was killed in a fiery car wreck. Tony said in an interview 5 years after Adrian was killed, it was like he was being interviewed for the 5-year anniversary and remembering Adrian, and he said, and I quote, "I loved her and I miss her and I like talking about her. We took flowers to the cemetery today and I probably go there more than I should. But it makes me feel good when I see someone else has been there too." So if you live in that area, I think it would be a pretty cool thing if you went and like put flowers at her grave. I wish I did, because that would be pretty cool to be able to leave something for her and let Tony see that people do still think about her and remember her and know what happened to her and care what happened to her, you know? Tony also said of his mindset of remembering what happened to Adrian that day in 2005 and how he felt, and he said, and I quote, "5 years ago, I never thought she ran away, but I didn't think she was dead. Some days, it still feels like that nightmare." The family has left Adrian's room exactly how she left it that day, just sort of adding things over the years, gifts, cards. They've like laminated news stories and left them there. And Joan, her stepmother, said of this and this sort of shrine they've kept for Adrian, and I quote, "I sometimes think we should clean it out, put it all away. Then I wonder if that is letting her go." Adrian's family started the Adrianne Lee Reynolds Memorial Fund after her death with the GED that Adrian was trying to get at the time of her death in mind. They said that getting her GED was super important to Adrian because she wanted to be able to get into the Marines, and she had to have gotten her GED in order to do so. And her family knows that a lot of kids want their GED and can't get it because they can't afford to like take the test. So they started this fund, and as of 2010, 66 students were able to get their GED due to this memorial fund. Now I want to end this video with one more quote from Tony. This is a little poem that he wrote, and I think it's a very sweet way to send off this video and a sweet thing that he wrote in memory of his daughter, and that was, and I quote, "You were dealt to be my daughter, I was dealt to be your dad. And no matter how the game turned out, you are the best hand I ever had. P.S. I love you and I'm proud to be your dad." And with that quote, that, my friends, is the story of the horrible murder of 16-year-old Adrianne Reynolds. Isn't that just so fucked up? This was such like a difficult case to look into. It was such a gnarly one, just to like read all of that and to think about Adrian and to think about what her final moments were like, and for such a stupid reason, for literally no reason. Truly though, there was just no point to it. It was all just like jealousy and obsession and possession that just spiraled into this giant fucking horrible tornado of bullshit. And in the end, Adrian's life was stolen from her, and so many other people's lives were ruined because of it. It ruined all the lives of all the people who loved Adrian. It ruined the lives of all the people who loved her murderers. These were kids as well, you know? When you're still that young, you have so many people in your life that still care about you, right? You haven't like outgrown a bunch of people, and most people in your life are still alive, you know what I mean? And so they ruined all these people's lives as well. And I read that this happened on Sarah's grandma's birthday, and that they had like gone and seen her during this time to like visit her for her birthday, and then she had to know that they had just killed somebody at the same time on her birthday. So like that was never the same for her either. That day was ruined for her as well. Which obviously that's not as bad as what Adrian's family is going through, but it's still like so many victims are created. Something like this spreads so far. It doesn't just stick to the people that it happens to. The ripple effect goes far and wide, and it goes farther and wider than anybody realizes. And so many people's lives are touched and affected and ruined because of things like this, and all for nothing, for something so stupid. I just hate it. But now that you've heard all of the details, I come back to the question of the day, and that is, do you think the sentences that these three were given were just? Do you think they were unconstitutional, or do you think that they were too light? Let me know down below what you think of the sentencing, because I'm very curious to hear all the different opinions on this. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and it gave you all of the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, thank you for hanging out and taking the time to remember Adrian with me today and what happened to her and her life. What happened to her is so horrible. It never should have happened. She should have been able to go to this new area, to get her GED, to go on to the Marines, to do anything and everything that she wanted to do with her life because she was just a kid and she deserved that chance. Adrian deserved to be happy and to have a life and to have a future, and her family deserved to have her and to see her have all those things. But her life was stolen from her, from a couple of dicks that even after all this time think their punishment was too harsh, even though they literally ended her life. But okay. Anyways, please let me know down below of any cases you would like to see me cover in the future, as this case indicates. If you leave me a suggestion, I will add it to my list. I have a very long list, and I will try to get to it. And if I do get to it, I will give you a shout out. I love when you guys leave me case suggestions because you're filled with really good suggestions that I love to look into. And obviously, you're filled with good taste and good ideas. Otherwise, you would not be here. Of course, if you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell so we can hang out all the time. And if you want to hang out more consistently, you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. They are all BRATTERSTEIN. Everything will be linked down below for you. I have everything listed along with all the makeup I used, the earrings, the nail polish, and a link to my merch store in case you want to get a shirt or something. Because I have shirts. Because you wanted some shirts, so I made some shirts. With all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye. You need some love real quick in a bottle. You need me to take a break.